You are listening to WWPT 90.3 FM. This is Gavin Rothenberg with Ty Levine on Out on a Limb. Here on Out on a Limb, if you're new here, we do movie review ratings. And today we're going to get into, in my opinion, one of the greatest films of all time, There Will Be Blood.
Yeah, so if you don't know us, there will be heavy spoilers ahead. So turn your radio station off if you haven't seen There Will Be Blood. We started out with a viewer experience. For me, the two movies that I think about most often in my life are There Will Be Blood and Fight Club. The character of Daniel Plainview, the main character of There Will Be Blood, so we'll get into this later, but he's known as a villain, but he's not totally a villain. He in my opinion is the most in-depth, the most complete character that has ever been on a movie screen. So just thinking about all the layers to his character, it sticks with me more than any movie I've ever seen.
Yeah, for me, going right off of that, my viewer experience was, I'm still thinking about it. And those are the best movies to me, the movies that still make you think right after you watch them. Even the second after, you're like, what just happened? And I think that's definitely a good thing. So I watched the movie today. It's all fresh in my head, and there's so many different aspects to the movie that I'm still thinking about. And for me, you talked about Fight Club, how it makes you think. There Will Be Blood makes me think a lot. It does not make me think as much as Fight Club did. Fight Club will make me think more than any other movie. But in general, the viewer experience for There Will Be Blood was definitely amazing.
Yeah, 100%. I just love this movie. I'm so excited to get into this. So the first thing that we talk about with our rating system is story, how interesting the story is, how it's told, certain scenes that we enjoy, certain quotes. So let's talk about the story of this movie.
So for the story, it takes place about in early or the late 1800s, early 1900s. It covers a 30-year span, and I think what you told me even before I watched it was how powerful the beginning and the end were, the opening scene and the ending scene. So the opening scene, it's Daniel Day-Lewis in 1898, and he's hacking at some rocks. He's looking for silver, and he ends up finding oil. And then the end of the movie, now spoiler, starting 30 years later, he's in a mansion, and he ends up killing Eli, the pastor. And while the beginning scene and the ending scene don't exactly correlate with each other, they show the development of the character of Daniel Plainview, and in general, it was both parts were extremely unbelievable.
Well, what I really love about the beginning and ending of this movie is how it really shows a huge contrast between the 1800s and the 1900s. At the beginning of the movie, it's Daniel Day-Lewis and a bunch of other workers. They're searching for oil, and they're so excited at the slightest bit of oil. They've been mining for days, but it's a very simple time where religion and where just simple traditional values dominated society. And then in the late 1920s, at the end of the movie, it fast forwards to Daniel in his mansion and almost domination of the country. And it really shows the shift from spirituality and religious values to economic values and manifest destiny of the 1900s.
And going off of that, something that made the story really interesting for me was how unpredictable it was. At least from my perspective, watching the movie, I had no idea what was going to happen next. I couldn't have predicted anything. And I think that's what makes the movie unique. It's that you never really know what's going to happen next. So I was not at all expecting that jump from the early 1900s to 1927, where all of a sudden HW is grown up and Daniel is even older, and he's living in this mansion. And I think that the unpredictable scenes, they satisfied me. They were all really good, and that goes into the viewer experience in that it was suspenseful, it was interesting, and I think it had a good combination and balance of having certain hidden messages within it, but at the same time being a visually interesting movie.
What I love the most about this movie is the rivalry between Eli and Daniel. Eli is the main. He's the main supporting character in this movie. He's well, if you're listening right now, you've seen the movie. So Eli and Daniel, they have a rivalry, and that's because Eli is viewed as this saint, this religious preacher, and he's viewed as an angel by the outside world. Daniel is viewed as a shrewd, ruthless businessman. But if you think about it, when it comes down to it, they're really the same. They're using others for the benefit of their own economic growth. Except Daniel uses oil and he's open about it, and Eli uses religion and he's a false preacher and people praise him for it.
And that will go under characters and character development. And to finish up story, I thought all around it was definitely a great story. It had me emotionally invested in it and what was going to happen next. So I gave it a 9 out of 10 for story.
I gave it a 10 out of 10 just because of how well the beginning and end were written and how they tie together so well. And also in between, so wonderfully created, just so many memorable scenes. They dive into Daniel Plainview. You just see so many layers of his character. The story's interesting. He has his son, all the supporting characters, Eli, Henry, HW. It's just a 10 out of 10 for me. I'd rewatch it a million times if I was able to.
So going on to the next category, which you were just talking about before with the similarities and differences between Eli and Daniel, is character and character development. And now, normally, character and character development is 10, 15, or 20 points, but we decided that because this movie was so focused on the characters, and I believe that it had some of the best or one of the best or the best characters that I've ever seen, we decided to make it out of 25 points.
Yeah, well, you just said one of the best or the best character ever. Daniel Plainview, in my opinion, is the most in-depth, the most notable character out of any movie I've ever seen. You
out
just
on
can't.
a limb here.
Yeah, I'm gonna go out on a limb and say this because we talked about how we can't stop thinking about this film, and that's because of the characters in it. And we're gonna talk about this more later. I mentioned it earlier. His villainous, whether he's a villain or not, it's just so, there's so many layers to it, and I'm so glad that we're reviewing it and we can unpack all of them.
So going into the similarities and differences, as you said, religion is Eli's business and business is Daniel's religion. So they're super similar in those ways. And as you were talking about, Daniel openly does this. He's openly, you could say, selfish because he's constantly trying to take advantage of people and do his best to get as much money as possible, while Eli is more hiding under this cover of being a preacher, but at the same time he's trying to do the same things as Daniel's doing. And that's what makes Daniel so angry, because Eli is looked at by his community as this amazing and good person, and he embarrasses Daniel as much as he can. And Daniel is viewed as a bad person and a selfish person when they actually are doing the same thing. And I think going into the ending, what we thought made it so powerful is Daniel turns the tables on Eli and makes him admit the type of person he is right before killing him.
Yeah, well, it's just so interesting because Daniel, throughout the story, you could certainly say that he struggles with relationships. He doesn't have many, and those that he has, he either ruins himself or they die. And just the way that Eli has tons of supporters from his church. He has companions everywhere, so many people supporting him, and Daniel has nobody. When in Daniel's mind, they're doing the same thing. They're doing the same bad things. And Daniel's aware that what he's doing isn't morally right. And he's also aware that what Eli's doing is, if not just as bad, if not worse. Yet Eli has all this support from other people, which Daniel has never been able to get. And he's just jealous of that fact. And that's why he has so much resentment towards Eli.
Yeah, and going into the ending, I know there was one thing that you actually thought about and found out about. So I'm going to let you talk about that with Daniel sort of finessing Eli.
Yeah, well, this is definitely finesse and a half from Daniel, because at the end of the movie, he forces Eli to admit that he's a false preacher because Eli thinks he's getting money from
and
Daniel.
that he doesn't believe in God as well.
Yeah. He forces Eli to admit that he doesn't believe in God, that God isn't real, and that he's a false preacher of the Lord. And Eli does that because all he wants is money. He doesn't actually believe in it, and he doesn't care about it. And it's not funny, but it is kind of funny that under the Christian religion, it's a sin denying God or anything like that. So under the Christian religion, which Eli dedicates his life to preaching or falsely preaching, he's going to hell because he committed a sin right before he died, right before Daniel killed him.
And going into characters as well, I'm actually going to go out on a limb here and say that the most important character in this film is one that was not even shown. I'm going to go out on a limb and say that the most important character in the film was Daniel's dad, because I think he caused every single thing that happened in the movie. And while we never actually see Daniel's dad or have any scenes with him, it's hinted at throughout many different scenes about the impact that he had on Daniel's life. So it is very clear that Daniel and his dad didn't get along when they grew up, and it's the main reason that he doesn't trust anybody around him. So when he first finds out that Mary is being beaten, he's immediately angry and sees to it that she will no longer be beaten, which is foreshadowing the fact that in his own past, his dad physically abused him. And now when Daniel's brother, or fake brother, Henry Plainview, comes to see him, he immediately opens up to him and trusts him, while he did that with nobody else. He enjoys moments with him. He does stuff with him that he had done with nobody else except for HW. And this is because he thinks that he has someone that he can relate to, that he can trust, because his brother went through the same emotional and physical pain in the past that he did. And that's why when he's betrayed by Henry and realizes that he's not actually his brother, he lashes out at everybody around him. So now he doesn't have Henry because he ends up killing him because it's not actually his brother. And HW, he can no longer confide in him and speak to him and be able to relate to him because he lost his hearing due to the oil well. So now that he has no one around him to trust, this is what causes him to lash out at everybody around him. And when he calls HW competitor and not his son at the end of the movie, it's not because he actually believes that or because he is selfish, even though he clearly is. It's because he can't trust anybody in his life. And it's hinted at that it is in large part due to the fact that his father completely changed the way that he was.
Yeah, well, you just said that the most important character in the movies is his father. And I'm going to go out on a limb and say the most important scene is when he realizes that his fake brother Henry is actually his fake brother and it's not actually his real brother, because I feel like his father created a baseline for all these trust problems and the lack of compassion that he has in his life. But when he realized that the one person he truly trusted and was able to open up with was lying to him and deceived him, that's when he kills him, and that's when every single other relationship, whether it's through blood, through his family, or just a friendship or whatever, that's when everything goes downhill because he's unable to trust anyone at all in the slightest bit for the rest of the film.
Yeah, I partly agree with you here that was the most important scene, but I think it goes hand in hand, and I would say just as important as a scene is HW becoming deaf, because those are the two building blocks that form Daniel into the person that he is. Because let's say Henry does betray him, he still has HW to confide in and talk to and trust, but once HW loses his hearing, he has no use for him anymore. He can't trust him anymore. He can't talk to him. He can't use him anymore to help his business, and now he has quite literally nobody in his life to trust or talk to or even to have a genuine relationship with.
Yeah, well, if we also fast forward to the ending, when HW marries Mary, I believe, he is technically Eli's uncle or something like that.
Yep.
So they are related through family, and killing Eli was the last relationship that he killed in his life after he said, I don't want to talk to you ever again, HW, after he killed his fake brother, after everything that happened in the film, he kills Eli and he says, I'm finished, because that signifies him being done, him single-handedly destroying every single relationship in his life. And that wasn't necessarily totally his fault. It was because of all these events that happened to him. But the trust issues that he has just made him like corrupted into thinking that all these people that might have truly cared about him, especially HW, who was probably the only person in the movie that had a true bond with him and truly cared about him. He's oblivious to the fact that HW is just trying to follow in his footsteps, and he thinks that HW is trying to be a competitor because of all the issues that he's had in his past life. And that's the reason that he kills that relationship, because in his mind, HW is just trying to be a competitor when HW is really just trying to follow in his footsteps.
Yeah, I'm giving the characters a 25. It was out on a limb rules. It's got to be either tied for the best or the best you've ever seen, and it's definitely there. It's got every single aspect. It has amazing development or lack of development within Daniel's character. It shows other great supporting characters, such as HW was a good character. Eli was most definitely a great character. And Henry Plainview, you could even argue, was a great character. So I gave it a 25 out of 25.
I could not agree more. 25 out of 25. I think the dynamic between Eli and Daniel makes this a 25 out of 25. And I also think just the complexity of Daniel's character makes it a 25 out of 25. I said he's the best character in film history, and I'll stand by that. You can at us on Out on a Limb Show if you disagree with that bold take, but I think it's the easiest decision I've ever made to give this a 25 out of 25.
Now moving on to acting. Once again, we usually do acting as 0 out of 10, but this movie was huge on acting. Acting played an insanely big role in it, and I think without the performance of Daniel Day-Lewis, this movie is mediocre. That's how I would put it. So we made it a 0 out of 20.
I don't know if I completely agree with that.
Maybe not mediocre because the messages are there, but I think that Daniel Day-Lewis is like his emotion, and his acting is what made it so good.
I say maybe it's mediocre compared to the film that we see today.
Yeah, exactly.
But I don't think it's mediocre in the grand scheme of cinema, just because everything about this movie was so perfectly made. Even like Daniel Day-Lewis elevated it to a whole new level. Yeah,
final piece.
He elevated it to a whole new level, but I think without him, the movie would still be a fantastic movie.
Focusing just on acting, though, Daniel Day-Lewis, as we were talking about, he won Best Actor for this movie. And I agree with this decision completely, actually, which we'll talk about later in the review, is that it was made in 2007, the same year as No Country for Old Men, one of our previous reviews. It was actually filmed only 7 miles away, so they were very close to each other. And I like the comparison between the two movies because both of them have amazing acting performances, with Daniel Day-Lewis and Javier Bardem in No Country. But Daniel Day-Lewis was unbelievable in every single aspect of this movie. I don't think he could have done anything better. He killed every scene. He was just perfect.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I think that so many out on a limb predictions today, but I'm going to go out on a limb, say this is the best performance ever. I think Daniel Day-Lewis is the best method actor the world has ever seen. He turns into Daniel Plainview in this movie. When I think of Daniel Day-Lewis, I think of Daniel Plainview, and you can't convince me that this is another guy in real life. He embodies him so perfectly, and just for this movie, I'd say that Daniel Day-Lewis is the best actor of all time. The only person to win Best Actor, an Academy Award for Best Actor 3 times. I think he's the best actor of all time.
Yeah, those are the best performances. This is what I would agree with you on. I honestly couldn't tell you my thoughts on the best actor ever. I haven't seen enough classic movies to make a decision on that, but Lewis is definitely up there. But as I was saying, the best performances are the ones you'll never forget. So if I ever saw Daniel Day-Lewis in another film, I will think of There Will Be Blood. If I ever see a movie with Edward Norton in it, I'm going to think of Fight Club. And it's just these performances that make you, like think of the movie that these people played and the role that they played whenever you see them. And
Yeah.
that's what makes the performances so good.
Yeah, absolutely. So we just talked about Daniel Day-Lewis' best performance of all time. Paul Dano, most underrated performance of all time. He wasn't even nominated for Best Supporting Actor in this movie, and I think this was one of the best supporting acting performances of all time, and he wasn't even nominated. That's such a violation to Dano and his family and everyone associated with him. It just an amazing performance from him. Daniel Day-Lewis, we talk about his method acting, but Paul Dano does almost as good of a job as the supporting actor. These scenes when he's preaching to the church.
He's crazy.
Yeah, he's out of his mind. It's so like chillingly realistic the way that he speaks and the passion in which he speaks with. I think it's the most underrated performance
He's
of all
literally
time.
acting within the acting.
Yeah.
Because his character is putting on a show.
Exactly. And I don't know. This is tough because 2007 Javier Bardem won Best Supporting Actor. So I can't definitely say that Paul Dano had a better performance, and I don't know if he did, but I'd say almost any other year, Paul Dano deserves to sweep the votes for Best Supporting Actor. Just such a spectacular performance from him.
Yeah, I don't think any of the other all the other characters acting was definitely solid. It wasn't anything special, but these two performances from these two actors make the acting a 20 out of 20 for me. It was unbelievable acting.
Yeah, for me, it's a 20 out of 20. I couldn't name one duo in any other movie that acted this well. It's just, they work so well together, too. The two characters, just the relationship, it's so real. And I've never seen it elsewhere, so it's an easy 20 out of 20 for me.
Moving on now to production / writing / directing. So this goes into visuals. It goes into the set that's within visuals. The script. So certain memorable lines or quotes. And I think the most underrated thing in movies, and one of the biggest factors for me in a movie, I'm gonna go out on a limb and say it's music, and not music movies. So not necessarily Whiplash. Obviously, was an amazing movie, but that's a movie about music. But Fight Club's music, the outro song, everything that it had, all the music that it had, Shawshank's music, that elevated those movies to such a higher level. And within There'll Be Blood, I really enjoyed the music. I texted Ty immediately in the first scene when you get a view of the mountains. It's like chilling music, and immediately I already knew I was gonna like the movie.
The music from this movie, it's etched in my mind permanently. I think it lives rent-free in my mind, I'd say. It's just it's chilling in a way, and it's just perfect. Like in the scene where Daniel finds out that Henry isn't actually his brother, the music shifts to an eerie tone, and it's just so perfect throughout the movie. It perfectly reflects the mood of each scene, and it just adds to every scene. So I just love it. And there are other aspects of production, writing, and directing that we'll get into, but just to start, music was on point for this movie.
The music was definitely great for There Will Be Blood, but now going into the script, I really like the script because while it was a movie that takes place in the late 1800s and early 1900s, I'm not a fan of the movies back then that you can't really think about in a time like now. Like, not just the slang or the dialogue, but not really being able to understand like what's happening and the impact of certain quotes. But I think that this movie did an amazing job with the script, and there are so many great lines that I would think about today and I could relate to, and that's what makes the script so good.
Well, when you mix an actor like Daniel Day-Lewis with a script like this, you're bound to get amazing results. There's so many quotable lines.
Drink your own milkshake.
Yeah, but we're gonna play that quote in a second. But I'm gonna admit I've spent time looking in the mirror and yelling, "I am the third revelation," because of these quotable lines in this movie, or "I drink your milkshake," stuff like that. So we're gonna play the quote right now. It's amazing. Here
Just sit back and relax.
Yeah, here it is.
If you have a milkshake, and I have a milkshake, and I have a straw, there it is. That's a straw, you see. Watch it. And my straw reaches across the room and starts to drink your milkshake. I drink your milkshake. I drink it up.
That was the quote right there. It shows Daniel Day-Lewis, his method acting, how he embodies the role, and it's a funny line, but it's so passionate.
It's powerful though.
Yeah, it is. It's just so it's so real. It feels like it's not a movie. It feels like it's real life.
And as well, I think within production, I think that the cast did a great job. I guess it goes into acting as well, of showing emotion. So even within that scene, you can't really hear that, but you could see like Paul Dano like shivering in fear, and there are certain small things. Like I know one scene where Daniel is abandoning HW on the train, and there's like a tear coming out of his eye right as he leaves. It's those little things that just make you think like, I didn't notice that, and that's sick, and that's what goes into production and what makes it so good.
Mm-hmm. On Twitter the other day, I saw someone debating whether an actor like Leonardo DiCaprio would have been better for the role of Eli, and I don't think he would have. I think Paul Dano was perfect. I think almost it worked to the benefit of the movie that it wasn't a super well-known actor. I don't really know why, but I think it worked well that I didn't know Paul Dano, and it
makes the character more mysterious.
It does. It also makes the performance more impressive, because I'm not, no offense to Paul Dano. I assume you're listening right now just because we're that big, but you don't look like the type of guy to explode into that passionate speech. Those like,
he kind of looks like a kid in the movie, like a young teenager or an old teenager.
You see him; he's pretty like, his face is just like he's just irreproachable. He's not really, doesn't look that mean, or like he kind of looks uninteresting when you're first introduced to the character.
He has a lot to him.
Yeah, and then when you cut to the scene when he's in the church, he's preaching in the church, he's completely different. It's like he's out of his mind. It's just I loved the casting decision to cast Paul Dano. I think it was perfect.
And now finally for production, the visuals, the set, what we actually see visually within the film that makes it so good. I think all around it was really, really good. The set was pretty mesmerizing, and the shots from the cinematographer, as you told me, Robert Elswit, all around it was really, really good cinematography, and I think it played an important part within the movie. And the visuals, it did represent 100 years ago, but it didn't make it, if this makes sense, like a boring 100 years ago. It made it like suspenseful within that like town and that little setting.
Yeah, Robert Elswit, he's known as one of the best cinematographers ever. He did No Country for Old Men too. I'd say that this and No Country for Old Men are arguably the two most visually appealing films of the 2000s to 2010s era. He's just amazing with the isolation of the desert and the mountains where they shot these movies, and just the close-ups, just everything about the movie, the shots. It's just the mesmerizing scene where the oil rig caught on fire. It's just a very visually appealing movie, and he did a spectacular job on the cinematography.
I'm so close to giving this a 10 right now. Like, very, very close. But I gave it a 9 out of 10. I just don't think just a reminder out there for all you new Out on a Limb listeners. I'm always going to use a perfect category and compare it to either Fight Club or Shawshank Redemption, but most likely Fight Club. It is my favorite movie of all time. It is is likely going to always be my favorite movie of all time. And when you when you compare the two productions between both movies, it's really, really close. And it's not about which one's better, it's if they're on the same level. And I just have Fight Club a little bit higher. So I gave There Will Be Blood a 9 out of 10.
I gave this a 10 out of 10 because Fight Club might have a better ending song, and it is a cool movie with like the nightlife and the lights and stuff. But I just love the isolation, the set, the shots of this movie were spectacular. The music might not have been iconic as There Was My Mind, the ending song in Fight Club, but it was perfectly placed throughout the film and consistent, which I loved. And the casting was amazing. It was just all around for this category: production, writing, and directing. Script, everything was pretty close to perfect for me, so I gave it another 10 out of 10. So far, everything has been perfect for me. Spoiler, it will not end that way, but it will end pretty close.
Now moving on, going to symbolism, we've given this a 0 out of 10, so it's out of 10 points. And I love symbols. I think that's another super important thing to me because symbols they represent something, and I think that's super important within a movie because it talks about and it goes within the how clever a producer is or a director is, and sort of like I guess you could say like the intelligence of the movie, if that makes sense. Like it tests the viewer's intelligence, and what I think makes movies so cool is being able to understand them. So when you watch a movie, being able to understand what's actually happening, not just the plot, but everything that goes into the movie, and symbols are super important to that. So I thought there were a couple of really, really good symbols within the movie.
Yeah, well, I'd say the most prominent symbol throughout the movie was the religious references, the references to the Old Testament and There Will Be Blood. The title comes from the Old Testament in the Bible, and just a lot of religious symbols with Eli and his church throughout the movie. And then the oil being Daniel's religion, where
That's what I would say is the most important symbol.
Yeah,
It's the oil.
well, but the oil isn't a symbol without Eli's religion. They kind of work hand in hand, just like the characters of Daniel and Eli work hand in hand, because the oil is, as we said earlier, the oil is Daniel's religion, and the religion, Eli's religion is kind of like his business, but it's kind of a cultural norm to follow a religion, and Daniel's religion is the oil and the strive to dominate the industry and become more prosperous and wealthy.
Yeah, and going into that, there are a couple examples in the movie that I would like to cite that show how oil is actually a religion for Daniel. That they're just these clever things that are put in the movie. So, in the beginning of the movie, when Daniel first discovers oil and his little crew discovers it, we see young HW as a baby, and one man takes a little bit of oil and rubs it on his forehead, maybe playing with him. But he rubbed it on his forehead as if it were a baptism. So it's just the first example of how oil is this sort of religion for Daniel and his family. The second example of it is when Daniel carries his gear with HW to go set down and get ready to start drilling the oil. It's shaped like the Holy Cross, his gear, which is just another small thing with Daniel about how oil was the religion and how he is still similar to Eli, about how they're both taking advantage of people in their own fields, and they're trying to make as much money or as much wealth, as you said, and trying to become as prosperous as possible. And I really like these small little tidbits that show how oil was actually a religion and relating the two both literally and figuratively.
Yeah, we briefly talked about the contrast between the 1800s, where religion dominated society, and the 1900s, where economic growth dominated society. And I feel like oil is a great representative of that. The church is kind of like of the past. At the beginning, they show it. You said they show HW getting baptized with oil, and that kind of shows how oil and the pursuit of oil and wealth was replaced religion in the 1900s.
And then one more small symbol that we talked about together was sort of the idea of the waves. So the scene that we both love so much, when Daniel realizes that his brother is an imposter, it's not actually his brother, he goes back in the water, or it's a scene from earlier when he was in the water, and the waves are just slowly getting bigger and building up, which represents the anger that is built up inside of him. And the thing that I noticed is right in the final scene of him in the water, the wave splashes over his head and the scene cuts immediately. And that was super powerful for me, because it showed how the anger was just boiling up inside of him, and boom, it goes over his head. Cuts right to the next scene where Daniel's preparing to confront Henry and end up murdering him.
Yeah, I'm sure there are a lot of symbols that even we missed in other scenes, but this wave building up in the background of Daniel that scene is so perfectly crafted when it comes to symbols, production, just everything about it. The look on his face when he starts turning around, the music suddenly changes, and the wave is about to crash. It's just perfect timing with everything. And I love that, even though it's not that significant in the grand scheme of the film, I love that little symbol. And it's a very clever placement by the director.
Yeah, I gave the symbols a 9 out of 10. I thought there were some really powerful symbols, but I think in general this movie wasn't really a movie that was all about symbols. A movie like Parasite is all about symbols. It had so many different symbols that represented the different social classes and the differences within them. And I just think this movie wasn't really about that. It wasn't aiming for having a ton of symbols. So I gave it a 9 out of 10.
Yeah, I gave it a 9 out of 10 as well. I think that the symbols were up there with the best. There are just so many of them, and they're very clever. I just wouldn't say they're as relevant and significant as the ones in a movie like you said, Parasite.
Moving on now to our final category, the one we always finish with. This is always out of at least 25 points because it's such an important thing. It's the theme and the message and how it relates to society at the time, how it relates to society today, and how it impacted us personally after watching it.
So when I finished this film, the first thing that kind of occurred to me was something to take away from it was that it just American society in general, it allows people like Daniel Plainview and like Eli Sunday, allows those type of people who use deceit and are just bad people. It allows those type of people to prosper. American society rewards those type of people with wealth and prosperity because of our capitalistic society. The best way to achieve wealth like that is creating a business and being absolutely ruthless and not caring about feelings, disregarding other people, having no compassion at all. And that clearly is not a good thing. And this movie kind of puts that on the screen with those two characters.
Yeah, we noticed this theme is similar in a lot of the other movies that we have reviewed. With Taxi Driver, we talked about how it glorified violence, and now this is talking about how society it gives power and prosperity to the people that go out and take it. And my favorite line of the movie that I always say is to drink your own milkshake. That's not the line from the movie, but the message to drink your own milkshake, because in society, if you don't drink your own milkshake, someone else is going to drink it, the same way Daniel drank Eli's milkshake, which really means that if you don't take advantage of any opportunity or chance that you have, someone else that is hungrier than you, that is more motivated than you, that is more determined than you, is going to take it from you without hesitating at all, and all of a sudden, you just lost your opportunity. So I think this could also go into the idea of the American dream and how exclusive it is, and that if you have the chance to chase it, you need to be motivated and ready and prepared to do it at all costs, if that makes sense.
Yeah, exactly. It ties back to what I said about the deceit and how that is how you succeed in America. You really don't have that much time and opportunity to rise to power like Eli or Daniel, but when an opportunity arises, you need to do whatever it takes to take that opportunity and capitalize on that. And most of the time, it's going to be destructive to someone else's life. And that's how capitalism works. That's how America works. Whether it's for the better or the worst, or the worst, this movie shows how our society works like that.
And I thought they did a really good job of putting it in a setting of over 100 years ago, but still relating it to how society works in today's world.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you look back to the time, we've been talking about religion and how the 1800s were dominated by religious beliefs. And the 1900s were really when industrialization started to ramp up and the economy became a priority.
Yeah, we learned about that in U.S. right now.
Yeah, shout out Miss Lynch. Yeah, so the true greed of the American economy and capitalism is kind of hidden behind it's like a
It's corrupt. That's how you could put it.
it's hidden behind Christianity and religion and good faith. In this movie, Eli disguises his spirituality for as being a
Greed.
good thing when he's really just being greedy and he's doing everything he can to make money and become wealthier.
And what's interesting is how Daniel is not behind any closed doors. He's open about it because he realizes that this is how society works. And while he isn't a people person, he doesn't know how to relate to others, he doesn't really understand how to talk to others socially, he knows how to get his bread. He knows how to drink his milkshake, how to drink others' milkshake, because he is all in on surviving and thriving. And Eli clearly isn't exactly prepared for that in the end, and that's why Daniel talks about how he wins.
Yeah, well, I'd say there are kind of three periods of time, three eras that are represented in this film. The first is one that's not even shown. It's the religious era of the 1800s, just all the 1800s. Then the very late 1800s, early 1900s, people like Eli start to pop up, which disguise preaching for religion and their spirituality. They disguise that as good. They act like that is what they're trying to do: spread religion and rid the world of sinners and make people better, when they're really using it for their own economic gain. And then Daniel Plainview represents the type of economic juggernaut that we know now, like Jeff Bezos or Mark Zuckerberg, who aren't hiding that they're crushing other smaller businesses to do what they're doing. And they're almost proud that they were able to work their way up in the society, the capitalistic society that's full of hyenas.
Yeah, you mentioned did you mention Mark Zuckerberg?
Yeah.
Yeah, going into Mark Zuckerberg, while I believe they are completely different, as one is a real character and one's fiction, and they obviously are different, you could compare the life of Mark Zuckerberg to the life of Daniel Plainview, because as we reviewed Social Network previously and talked about in the past about how when he becomes Mark Zuckerberg and he makes all this money, it's almost literally impossible for him to trust anybody around him because they all want him for his money. It's impossible for him to make new friends because people are trying to take advantage of him. Even people from his past are trying to take advantage of him, and he doesn't really know what to do socially. Daniel is sort of this character that as he says, he sees the worst in people. So he thinks that everybody around him is going to take advantage of him. And that ultimately is the downfall of both of them. They both believe that everybody around them is going to take advantage of them. And they're both in situations where all they care about is their place economically. And it's the reason that the people closest to them, for Zuckerberg, it meant Eduardo. For Plainview, it meant HW. It's how they lose the people closest to them.
Yeah, absolutely. Daniel represents that era of the modern businessman where they will do anything to achieve wealth and to grow their business, and they're not hiding it. They're not ashamed of it. And Daniel really showed the transition from spirituality, true spirituality, to people like Eli who are hiding it, to proud, ruthless businessmen that we see today.
And also going into the ruthlessness of society, another point that I thought about and I like to bring up is the importance of having someone to trust and care for, and the lack of that in these two situations. Because society is not going to actually welcome you with open arms and care for you, even though they're going to act like they did. So a great example of that, I'm going back to Social Network again, is Justin Timberlake's character in Social Network. He welcomes Mark Zuckerberg with an open arms and acts like he cares about him, acts like he's his best friend, but in reality, he's just there for the money and to grow and to become rich. And I think a great example of this in There Will Be Blood is the church. So when Daniel first becomes baptized, every single person in the church goes up to him and says, like, welcome, brother Daniel, welcome, we're happy to have you here. But the church is literally fake. Like, it's not real. The beliefs they have are not real. Eli's whole entire point is not real. It's the only reason he does it is to get money. And the same way that Justin Timberlake was looking to get money in Social Network, Eli is just looking to feed off Daniel's profit and get his own money. And that is shown in the end when he literally admits to Daniel that he is a false prophet and he doesn't believe in God and he just wants money. He's continuously begging Daniel to give him money.
Well, I feel like a lot of movies look into people going off the rails from the poor treatment of society. I'd say Travis Bickle in Taxi Driver, which was our last review, and Arthur Fleck in Joker, they both reflect how you deteriorate when you don't have the support from others and you don't have true relationships with others, and when you're, in a way, neglected by the outside world. And I feel like Daniel Plainview is the most in-depth, best representation of the derailment of a person like that, and that's why I love this movie so much. I feel like the character of Daniel Plainview does it better than Travis Bickle, does it better than Arthur Fleck. It's just the golden performance, the golden character. It's just the best. It's simply better than any other attempt of doing a character like this.
Yeah, and I think it all really goes into the lack of I don't know, is genuality, not how genuine people are, the lack of that within society, and how you're going to get eaten up by society if you're not strong, if you don't stay strong, if you don't put up a wall. And when I first rated this theme, I had it as a 23 out of 25, but after thinking about this new point about how it relates to the Social Network within people that are prominent, people trying to take advantage of them within society, about you needing to take your chances, about the good of Christianity covering up for this greediness and corruption, I actually changed it to a 24 out of 25.
I gave it a 23 out of 25 just because I'd say that Parasite has the most relevant themes. It's very relevant to economic and social status in modern society. I'd say Taxi Driver is very similar to Parasite in a way that how society treats its poor and neglected. But I feel like Fight Club really does theme the best out of any movie I've ever seen for me. It really speaks to me with Tyler Durden representing the freedom of inside of people, and Edward Norton representing, or he's the narrator in the movie, doesn't have a name, but in the book he goes by Jack. He represents how people are told to get a 9-to-5 job, go to college, do everything, and then they still feel dead inside. That speaks to me. This doesn't quite speak to me, but I understand how it could speak to others, and it's such a deep and meaningful theme. There's so many themes and messages in this movie, and they're all deep and meaningful, and it doesn't quite speak to me as much as others do, but I understand why they are so important and significant. So I still gave it a 23 out of 25.
Yeah, now including the rating of the theme, adding up the total score, I ended with a 96 out of 100, and I believe that is just right behind Fight Club and Shawshank Redemption, and I honestly didn't think I was going to give it that high until we talk about it, and that's what I love so much about participating and doing these shows, because it's a pleasure for me to actually unpack the movie, as not only are we allowing the viewers to have this experience, I'm having this joy and opening of my mind to myself, and it makes me like these movies even more when we bring up points to each other that we never even noticed in the first place. And I gave this a 96 out of 100. It was almost on the level of Fight Club and Shawshank, and it's probably number 3 there for me for best movies I've ever watched.
For me, I'd say the most difficult question you could ask me is, you put Fight Club, Shawshank, and There Will Be Blood next to each other, and you tell me to choose one. I could not do it. You could give me 2 weeks straight, and thinking about it, I could not decide. And I have so much trouble rating a movie like this, because part of me wants to say it's the best movie of all time. Part of me wants to say it's the second best. Part of me wants to say it's the third best, in my opinion. I'm giving it a 97. That's equal to what I have Fight Club at. It's pretty much equal to Fight Club and Shawshank. I can't really decide right now. Eventually, we'll do a rankings for movies that we reviewed, but I'm just not ready to decide right now. So I gave it an equal rating to those two. So technically, it's tied for the best movie of all time, in my opinion.
And that just about wraps it up here on... Oh, excuse me. Sorry.
Yeah. Before we wrap this show up, we talked about this a little bit earlier, and I think it's just interesting to talk about a little at the end of the show, because this movie was created in an interesting time with There Will Be Blood, or with
No Country
for Old Men being created in the same year. And I just wanted to talk about the decisions that the Academy made in the Academy Awards, and if you agree with them, or if you change them, if you had a vote. So There Will Be Blood did not win Best Picture. No Country for Old Men won Best Picture, Best Movie of the Year. And I certainly disagree with that. I think There Will Be Blood is one of the best movies of all time. I just said it's a top 3 movie, a bona fide top 3 movie for me. I think it should have won. What do you think, Gavin?
Yeah, I actually agree with you. When you first talked to me, I thought you said that There Will Be Blood beat No Country, but I like the ideas and themes of No Country, but I didn't even think the actual movie, like the picture, was that good for No Country. Like other than the fighting scenes and Bardem being an absolute beast, like I thought There Will Be Blood definitely outmatched it in almost every way, and I think it definitely should have won.
Yeah, and then the other controversial decision, which for a lot of people wasn't that controversial, because Paul Dano wasn't even nominated for Best Supporting Actor. It was Javier Bardem versus Paul Dano. Javier Bardem won it, and it wasn't really close at all, because Dano wasn't nominated and none of the other nominees were really even close to him. So if Dano were nominated, who would you give the award to?
Well, I think Dano definitely should have been nominated, but I'll still give it to Bardem, because I guess you put him under supporting actor, but he was kind of like the main part of the movie. He was sort of the main actor in a way, and I think that his way of presenting that villain, I would give it to him over Dano, even though I absolutely loved his performance. Super, super underrated. I think Bardem should deserve to win it.
In my opinion, I think that Paul Dano had more passion with his performance, but I think Javier Bardem embodied his character more, and I do think that he had a more impactful performance on the history of cinema, because Heath Ledger's Joker in The Dark Knight was largely influenced by him. I feel like because of that impact, he was deserving of Best Supporting Actor, which he won.
And now, I believe we are just about finished here. I'm Gavin Rothberg with Ty Levine on Out on a Limb. This has been our review for There Will Be Blood. An absolutely amazing movie, top to bottom. Amazing performances by the actors Daniel Day-Lewis and Paul Dano. Fit all of our categories, super well. Everything was well rated. I ended up giving it a 96. Ty gave it a 97. Up there with some of the best movies we've ever watched. This is going to do it for Out on a Limb, and we'll catch you guys in our next review.